US President Donald Trump signing his deal he's negotiated with Iran over the Strait of Hormuz, its nuclear program, lifting all US sanctions, setting up a multi-billion-dollar reconstruction fund. There's a lot on that piece of paper that Donald Trump is signing, and there's a lot to say about it. We will discuss it all on this episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Well, we can catch up now with Chief International Correspondent Lyse Doucet. Lyse, where in the world are you?
Well, I'm in a place I don't normally visit, and I'm in Switzerland. I'm in Lucerne, in the central part of Switzerland, about a 20-minute drive from the fancy resort Burgenstock, where we understand that another formal signing of the Iran-US deal is going to be signed, and they will actually on the spot then begin those negotiations, that 60 days of negotiation. So it's an historic moment for all of the questions marks above this historic moment.
And also joining us is Chief North America Correspondent Gary O'Donoghue. Hi, Gary.
Hi, Adam. I'm in steamy Washington, as you know.
Yes, where there's just as much action happening as well, but maybe fewer mountains. Right, lots to get through in terms of what this Iran deal is. Lyse, first of all, just talk us through the pictures we got from the Palace of Versailles on Wednesday night, just as you and I were sitting down to be on the Newsnight sofa together.
Yes, well, there you had it. The G7 nations, President Trump holding court, to use the Versailles, and he did the signing of the deal. He himself, the deal had been signed digitally before. Then it was signed by President Trump. And now we've had, after in these indirect talks for weeks now, we've had the exchange of messages. Now we've had the exchange of photographs. So President Trump signed it in Versailles. President Masoud Pezeshkian signed in Tehran. One of the key mediators, the Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, he signed, and they put out pictures of his signing this morning. And Qatar, we expect, will also be here tomorrow for this next step of the process. There was a lot of congratulations to President Trump by President Macron and others, saying well done, and for all of the criticism of this deal that Gary knows so well. The president seems very proud of himself.
And we can talk about some of the implications of it in a second, but just in terms of how this deal has been rolled out, Gary, is it true that you were on this big conference call on Wednesday night or Wednesday afternoon where you are, where the US officials were reading it out word for word to you down the phone?
Yeah, I can't tell you who it was. It was a very senior administration official, and they literally read it out. They read it out and they gave a little commentary on each paragraph. I mean, the spin, as you might call it. It took an hour or so, and then there were lots and lots of questions. And there were lots of attempts to clarify various points on it, particularly the issue around this $300 billion reconstruction fund, which is already coming for some criticism from some Republicans here, and also some clarification around the nuclear issue, because if you remember, the US said it was going to take that nuclear material out of the country. The deal does not say that, even according to the Americans. So there's lots to get into in the detail here. And what we're seeing now is a battle royal for public opinion, a real battle to see who wins the spin game over what this deal means in the coming days.
Well, let's dig into the deal then. We won't do all 14 points, but I thought we could recreate that conference call Gary was on Wednesday night by going through some of it in detail and then get both of you to comment on it. So the first point is the United States of America and the Islamic Republic of Iran and their allies in the current war, by signing this memorandum of understanding, declare the immediate and permanent termination of military operations on all fronts, including in Lebanon. So Lyse, that's basically the 60-day ceasefire to open some space to negotiate some other details.
But there's the word permanent in there. This is what Iran has called for from the beginning. And everyone said, well, how can you actually achieve that? The end of the war? They've made it clear they don't want to lurch from one ceasefire to the next. Bear in mind, there was another war, a 12-day war in 2025. They said as part of this deal, it has to be the end of the war. So this seems to signal that this is what it's all about, not just for 60 days, but the end of the war. I don't know what they said in Gary's conversation, but critically as well, Lebanon. Already today, we're hearing of Israeli strikes. We're hearing also of casualties. And this is going to be one of the many weak pillars of this new process, if you like.
Adam, it's also worth saying that that mention of Lebanon is the only mention of Lebanon in the whole document. There's nothing else about what happens with Lebanon. That one mention.
And of course, Hezbollah and the Israeli government, who are responsible for the hostilities in southern Lebanon, are not parties to this agreement, Gary.
No, they're not, and nor is Israel. And that is the thing that could derail the whole thing in the medium and longer term. Israel, of course, the Prime Minister is facing elections. He's facing a hammering at home over this deal. People saying, it was good you started it, but you didn't finish it. And then the president here expressing his frustration with Benjamin Netanyahu, telling him he doesn't have to knock down apartment blocks to kill one person, even extraordinarily suggesting this idea that the Syrians could go in and sort out Lebanon. Which is, obviously unthinkable, in all sorts of ways. So that is the big unknown about the future in terms of the stability of this whole deal.
And then, Lyse, points 4 and 5 are about the lifting of the US blockade of Iranian vessels in the Strait of Hormuz, and then Iran reopening the Strait of Hormuz to everybody. How do we think that is actually going to work?
In this beginning, it's starting to work very well. The vessels are already going through. Some Iranian oil tankers are said to have moved through the straits. It will take time, we understand, for the mines to be cleared. That could be a matter of weeks, maybe even months. Those tankers, those other vessels have been idling there for many, many months. And so it may take a bit of time. They have to be reassured that this is going to last. But we've already seen the oil prices have come down. In fact, they're now, I think I read just before I joined you, that they're the lowest. They've gone back to the level before the war. And also the market has gone up, the activity in the market, which has led President Trump to issue one of his Truth Social posts. And if I remember correctly, he said, anyone who criticizes this deal, after he noted how the markets have responded, he said are stupid, ignorant, or just jealous. But crucially, the deal also says that the Strait of Hormuz will remain toll-free for 60 days, and then there is to be a regional dialogue to decide how to run the strait run the Strait of Hormuz, this strategic waterway. And this is where Iran is going to insist. We are already hearing from senior Iranian officials today. President Trump says there will be no tolls, but there will be something, according to Iran. They're planning to charge some kind of fees for services. They've already had discussions throughout the war and the ceasefire with Oman, which controls the southern coast of this strategic strait. Of course, there'll be other countries in the region, like the United Arab Emirates, which don't want Iran to have any foothold at all in this strait, seeing it as a dangerous precedent for straits the world over. But this is just the beginning for Iran, and I think Gary would say that is another weakness as far as the critics of the deal are concerned.
Yeah, it's interesting. The spin here on that is that, look, when this discussion takes place after 60 days, none of those other countries in the Gulf are going to allow Iran to charge. That's their spin here. Now, that still leaves open the distinct possibility that there could be a position we get to after this war where there are these charges, and that would be completely different to what we had before the war. Part of me wonders, of course, because the US isn't all that dependent on the oil that goes through those straits at all. Part of me wonders whether there's a sort of competitive advantage for the US. Maybe that's too Machiavellian, but maybe there's some sort of advantage in that ending up being the case. Who knows? And I'm no economist.
You mean, in other words, make China's oil imports more expensive because America doesn't get them via that route?
It would, wouldn't it? So who knows what the thinking is behind that? But certainly the spin is, of course it won't happen because other countries in the region won't let it happen. One other quick thing on the mines. That is a key point. There's a load of mines there. One very senior national security official told me recently that they have a pretty good idea where they all are. And the other thing they're saying here is that the sort of risk, the appetite for risk varies significantly between different shipping operators. So some, are prepared to go through this southern channel near Oman and take a chance. Others are much more risk averse. I want to wait and see until it's cleared. So there's not kind of just a switch that you flick and everyone suddenly sails out of the Gulf into the Sea of Oman. That's not the way it's going to work.
And then point 6 of this 14-point plan is the one that you were referring to earlier, Gary, about this $300 billion reconstruction fund, and that's £225 billion in sterling. Just explain what the idea of that is.
Well, the idea is opaque. I mean, what the deal says is that the US undertakes, along with its other regional powers, to create this at least $300 billion. This is what it says, at least $300 billion fund. Now, the spin on this yesterday was we don't have to pay them a cent. It's all performance based. It'll probably come from sanctions relief and unfreezing of assets. We're not giving them anything. So the words kind of don't really match what the spin was yesterday. And there's a reason for that, which is because this is the thing that will really get under the skin of Republicans here. And we've already seen Ted Cruz, the Texas Republican senator, come out and say, if this is it, then this is a huge mistake. Oh, but we love your deal, President Trump. So there's potential here. I mean, Bill Cassidy, another Republican senator who's no friend of Donald Trump and has actually been primaried out of his seat in November, he said it was the worst foreign policy mistake in decades. I mean, he kind of would say that, wouldn't he? But even so, there will be others who think that, who aren't prepared to say it out loud. So there's a lot of questions around that fund. And, it's very tempting, isn't it, given the context of Versailles, to use other words for that fund, maybe that begin with R and like reparation.
Yeah, lots of Versailles jokes being made after the banquet and the signing last night. And then, Lyse, we get onto point 7 and 8, which is talking about the US lifting their sanctions on Iran, which would then allow Iran to sell loads more stuff like oil on the international market. And then what the Iranian government's responsibilities would be for its nuclear program in return. Just explain what we think is going to happen there.
Well, there's a lot of criticism, too, that there's been a temporary waiving of the sanctions which have prevented, or at least the restrictions preventing Iran from exporting its crude oil, its petroleum product. And now it has waivers allowing it to do that, and also to access the transportation services and the banking services which are necessary for carrying out those kind of deals. And then when it gets to sanctions and unfreezing of the assets, that's in the second part of the deal, and that is where Iran is going to have to make concessions. I think there's a widespread assessment that when you add it up, Iran has done really well on this memorandum of understanding, or many are now saying the memorandum of misunderstanding. But if Iran wants the sanctions lifted, if they want the frozen assets, and it's interesting on that, I'm sure you noticed it, Gary, President Obama had released Iranian money that had been frozen as part of the Iran nuclear deal in 2015. And President Trump never stopped saying, look at that money that President Obama gave to the Iranians. And yesterday he said, well, no, that's their money. It belongs to them. Complete turnabout in how he described that kind of money. But there's the wording of, I don't have it in front of me, the wording of is something on a schedule that will be agreed by both sides. In other words, Iran will have to take a step and then sanctions will be lifted. It will be, Iran has said it wants these kinds of negotiations. You do this, very transactional, like President Trump, like you do this and we'll do that. But when it comes to the nuclear program, which is really the core of this deal, for all of the ways in which President Trump, changes from one day to the next what he really wanted to achieve in Iran, he was always consistent. It was about that Iran could never acquire or develop a nuclear weapon. So that is key in this agreement. But they're using a word that's either reiterate or reaffirm, which means to say, Iran has said this before. Yes. It's been saying it for many, many years. It said it in the 2015 nuclear deal. And when they get the little hints of what would be the shape of Iran's nuclear deal, as Gary mentioned, there's no mention of President Trump's repeated demand that what he calls nuclear dust, which is 440 kilograms of highly enriched uranium, has to be shipped out to the United States. Instead, there's a mention of the downblending, which diluting this uranium. And that's a concession Iran made before the war. I was in those talks in Geneva, in Switzerland, coincidentally. On February 26, Iran offered to dilute its highly enriched uranium, again, which prompts the critics to say, what was the point of this war? You could have got that before you spent billions and billions of American taxpayers' dollars.
And Lyse and Gary, I'm just thinking of things that we've become very familiar with over the last few months that don't really appear anywhere in this text. Iran's support for its proxies around the region. We already talked about Hezbollah in Lebanon. Iran's ballistic missile program. So not nuclear weapons, just conventional weapons that could be used to hit, I don't know, American aircraft carriers or other targets. Regime change. And the Supreme Leader is still the son of the previous Supreme Leader. Gary, there's a lot of things that have been talked about extensively that are just not addressed.
Yeah, the ballistic missile program is a big one, and that is also something that will annoy a lot of Trump supporters here because of the direct threat, obviously, to Israel, and for those on the right who are, significant and big backers of Israel here, that is something that they have always been concerned about. But that is not on the table at all. In terms of the proxies, the spin has been, well, we've told them they can't sponsor violence in the region anymore. Well, okay, well, let's see how that one pans out. But there's, the focus for this administration has been the nuclear material in particular, and that's where they think they've got the win. But there is a lot that has been on the table at various points that is not in this deal whatsoever. So that is, that will be chalked up, I think, as a win for the Iranians on this memorandum of understanding. And that's why, we've had multiple briefings, as we 10 minutes from when we're talking as we record this, the vice president is actually going to be at the White House doing another big public briefing this time for members of the press in the press room about this deal. So the offensive is on.
Well, Gary, I will take the hint and let you go and watch JD Vance. And then, Lyse, you will welcome JD Vance, not personally, but you'll see him where you are on Friday.
Yeah, I think for all of our talk about the going back and forth, this is a historic moment in Switzerland. I keep thinking about that hot summer's day in July 2015 and the feeling then that for all of the shortcomings in the 2015 deal, President Obama always said, there's no trust in this deal. You have to verify. And negotiations is about give and take. Both sides got something and both sides lost something. But I can still remember the headiness of that day, that truly history was made, multilateral arms control agreement. Fast forward to where we are today, the press coverage is going to be limited. There's only going to be pool cameras. I'm thinking, well, what will it feel like tomorrow to see if this happens, if the American Vice President J.D. Vance is in public shaking hands with Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, the Speaker of the Parliament, sending a symbol of this is an effort. I'm not going to say like President Trump that he's done it already, but an effort to try to begin to end 47 years of enmity, then that is something to take note of.
Well, thank you for taking note for us. Lyse, thank you.
Thank you.
And Gary, thanks to you too.
Thanks, Adam.
Right, now I'm going to read an email that popped up in the Newscast inbox, and it says, first, thanks for your Newscast podcast. It's how I keep up with UK politics. Thanks especially for the episode on the social media ban. I've had a lot to do with the ban in Australia. Indeed, I raised it in my maiden speech to the Australian House of Representatives when I was first elected in 2022. I also heard your call out at the end of the pod for Newscast listeners in World Cup countries. I'm happy to be Australia if you need someone from there, although I recognise an Australian politician might not be what you had in mind. That said, I might be a low-cred choice only because I missed the first match, Australia 2, Turkey 0, on Sunday because I was at an electorate event. Let me know what you think. And that email was from the Australian MP Zoe McKenzie, a member of the Liberal Party for the division of Flinders in Victoria. And she's on Newscast now. Hello, Zoe.
Hello. It's so exciting to join you from 16,000 odd kilometres away.
Well, and thank you for listening and for all that distance.
Well, as I think I said, I've been listening to you for years now, like since you were Brexit cast, right? Because Brexit was so interesting for us. I'd also been working in global trade for a long time. So, of course, it meant, a new potential free trade agreement that ultimately was signed. And so what Brexit meant in terms of global trading partner, in terms of, reconnecting some of our bonds, I think, with the United Kingdom was really interesting here for Australia. And so I listened to you all through the Brexit cast years, and now back to Newscast.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for staying with us. Let's talk about current things and the social media ban. So obviously that's big news here in the UK because the government's announced this week that they're planning to go ahead with it probably in spring next year. I mean, how is it going in the place that invented it, Australia?
Yeah. So look, it sometimes feels two steps forward, one step back, insofar as it was a long time coming. You know, I mentioned to you in my email that I had first raised this as an issue in September of 2022. We'd just come off the back of COVID. My hometown of Melbourne had particularly strict lockdowns over a period of 2 and 3 years. And I could see in my own stepkids, in my friends' kids, the impact that too much screening and in particular too much social media was having on kids. I think it started a long conversation in the Australian Parliament, which then I think in a similar kind of weird political twist, our leader of our Conservative Party, so the Liberal Party, came out and said, right, we're going to do something on this, which then forced the government to have a good hard look at it. They eventually did an inquiry and an investigation into what was going on and then said we will move to ban, and then gave the platforms 12 months to actually implement a system to ensure 16-year-olds would be not entirely de-platformed, but de-accounted. They couldn't have accounts anymore. You can still be on the platforms, particularly if you're through a web browser portal, if you want to go onto TikTok and things like that. But we figured it was the account that drove the algorithmic push and was more likely to lead to infinite scrolling because it's perfectly attuned to the account holder. And so that's what we targeted. Now, that came into effect in December of last year. And the first and only sort of report card we've had so far, which was 3 months in, said that about 5 million accounts had been sort of cancelled. Now, that sounds like a lot because we have less than 5 million people aged between 13 and 16, and our age is 16. But what we hear is that now about 30% of kids in that age group still have accounts.
And how's that happened?
Well, we think it's, a combination of VPNs, crafty kids grabbing your sister to, show her face to the screen. So we haven't implemented sort of proof of age through digital ID or passports or anything like that. We ask the platforms to use their know-how to determine the age of the users. And we're very confident they can actually do that because in the year before the ban came into place, TikTok actually cancelled 800,000 accounts in Australia because it was very confident that they were under what is the US age of 13. So we know they can do it. And it's just a question of the rigorousness with which they do it. Now, since discussing this in Australia, I have travelled and spoken to either public servants or policy advisors or parliamentarians in Denmark, France, Germany, at the EU, spoken to good folk at the OECD, and just basically because a little market like ours of 26 million people is not quite enough to get the platforms to fully comply.
Right.
But once we bring these
because they're like,
markets
it's only Australia. It's not like it's the EU. They're huge. Yeah.
We get the whole, if you make this too hard, we will leave. You guys can't. You're much bigger than we are. We're probably much more valuable to them as a market as well. So once Europe comes on board, the platforms sort of have nowhere to run and hide. So I've always been very keen that Europe actually sign up to this as well. And obviously the EU is as well. And you've made this declaration on Monday that you will go down that path. And I think there's great overlap. My quick review of which platforms are targeted by your change are roughly the same as ours. So again, that will mean those big ones in particular are forced to tackle this properly.
On that 30%, do you think that that's just sort of, it's going to be a fact of life that any jurisdiction that imposes a ban like this, you're probably going to have around about a third of children are able to find a way around it? Or is the goal to sort of drive that down even further?
No, the goal is to drive it down even further. We're not in the habit of passing legislation that we hope will be partially addressed. We pass the legislation because that's what we expect the platforms to do. And so the e-Safety Commissioner here, who has very strong powers in this respect, and indeed if we believe a platform hasn't taken reasonable steps to comply, they can be fined up to 49.5 million Australian dollars. But, it's not an inconsequential fine to not try hard enough. And again, I suspect the systems will have to get much more robust in terms of making sure that those accounts are closed until the user is 16. And again, as I said, they'll get more robust because your market is bigger. And at the European market of 450 million people as well, and it's even bigger still. So we will get there. We will get there in the end.
Okay. And just in terms of how it works in Australia, and I'm thinking about practicalities here, one of the things that people have raised this week as a concern is the logical extension of this, that every user has to prove their age in some way whenever they want to use one of these apps. And so actually that's the way that you stop young people having access to them, is by making everyone have to prove their age all the time. It doesn't sound to me like that's a thing that happens in Australia.
No, it's not. And may I say, there were lots of kind of furphies and panic stories circulated at the time, lots of cries of free speech and all this sort of stuff. And of course, what we're trying to do at the heart of this reform is to create a market for safer social media. This was the conversation I had with my friends from the CDU in Germany recently. They said, well, we don't like to interfere in a market like this. And I said, yes, but just think about it this way. What we're trying to do is create a safer market in the same way that we have safe markets for solar panels and safe markets for home heaters and ovens and safe markets for cars. It's just trying to ask for a safer market for social media for teenagers because the evidence of damage is just too great. There's a tipping point at which legislators must act, and we have done that. And over time, it will get better. It's probably taking longer. To be fair, I'm in the opposition. We would have liked it to have been done better. We would like it to have been done swifter. But we understand, as the sort of first mover in this space, that it will take time. And again, as I've said, I'll be much happier when we've got bigger markets taking similar reforms, because then your Metas and your Googles and others will have to find a way to do it.
And then one of the other concerns being raised this week is the sort of the YouTube science lecture complaint. What if you're limiting access to YouTube for students who are really into a particular subject, and you're denying them access to Nobel Prize winners doing lectures and posting them online?
And that's exactly the case here. Like, I heard your podcast yesterday, day before, with your education minister equivalent, and just the importance of some of these tools as education tools, and which side of the line you need to fall. So YouTube is used across the education system in Australia now, and so you can't deny access. It's part of the curriculum. So what happens now is kids can click on a particular YouTube link and they can go find things. The only thing they can't do is have an account. Now, some people have said, well, hold on, I actually liked having an account for my child before because as the parent, I could monitor it. And that, if that was every parent, and if every parent had the time to be able to do that, we probably wouldn't have a problem. But it was overwhelmingly the parents who came to us and said, I had no idea what rabbit holes my child was going into. I had no idea how quickly this could take hold of my child's mental health. And so you'd have happy, independent, resilient child, and 6 weeks later, a very, very precariously depressed child. And the parents felt unable to either monitor or guide, because, of course, all of our algorithmic feeds are completely idiosyncratic, right? We are a bit similar to you at the moment. We're having great fluctuations in Australian politics here, with some more right-wing parties, particularly around things like migration. People ring me in a panic and go, oh my God, there's all this terrible stuff online, and
Which
it's
you've
all
never
you
seen.
see, it's all you see. And I go, I don't see any of it. I'm like the Pollyanna politician. I don't see any of this stuff. I see good stuff and good debate, interesting debate, and what's happening in the United Kingdom in social media. But that's because that's the stuff I'm interested in, right? So you get fed what you're interested in. And so people think that their kids are just seeing what they're seeing. And it's like, no, your child is in a very, very different place. And unless you're sitting on their shoulder, you're not going to see where your child is digitally.
Yeah. I'm just wondering how this is going to work in the UK, because now that you talk us through very clearly that it's about accessing accounts as opposed to accessing the services, because the way our ministers talk about it here is it's that a 14-year-old set of eyeballs will never get sight of TikTok in any form until those eyeballs turn 16, which is a slightly grim way of talking about it, I realize, but and it actually that's not what you do.
No. So we basically say no accounts, but that means if you have an account and you want to show it to your child, you're welcome to do that, particularly if you can, be there with them and talk about what they're seeing, and that would be an ideal case. And again, they can go to the platforms themselves and they can go on YouTube. They can probably go on Reddit without an account, again, just to explore, to see what they want to discover there. And so we thought that was, because so much of the, how to put it, the deleterious effects are embodied in that algorithmic feed. That's the dopamine loop, that's the infinite scrolling, and we don't have a history of online regulation the way you do. So obviously you've got the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act in the EU context. You've got similar things. You've got much more stringent online safety laws, or a history of them, than we do. So Australia's approaching online regulation cautiously and methodologically. We have a real opposition amongst the population to digital ID. People don't like it, they don't trust it. Various efforts to have sort of created, an Australia card for identity, things like that, or even health records. Australians go, no thanks, don't want it. So we have not had a history of intervention in this space the way you have. So I imagine you've got greater social license for regulation in the UK than we do. So we did what is a fairly light touch version. All the onus is on the platforms. No child who manages to get themselves on TikTok at age 13 is ever going to get a tap on the shoulder from any authority. It's the platforms that are the ones who need to comply.
The pressure is applied to, yeah. And then in terms of the list of apps, because you have in your legislation, there's a list of the services that you're talking about. Yeah. Has anything been added to that list since the ban was introduced?
So when we started the parliamentary inquiry into this particular topic and we looked at what should be on it, the list was actually much shorter. So it was Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, and X. And then they have subsequently added Kik, Reddit, Threads, Twitch, and YouTube. Now, YouTube was the one that was like, whoa, careful, because this is quite an educational tool. But that's, the eSafety Commissioner provided advice to say most of the really shocking, violent, extremist content that young people are seeing is via YouTube, and that's why it was added. But I think YouTube Kids is still out. So you can have an account on YouTube Kids because guess what? It's a safe social media platform. And again,
because it's been designed to be,
Exactly. If you make all these platforms safe, there is no problem. Like Meta, having said to us in our committee, it can't be done, it can't be done, it can't be done, launched Instagram Teens a couple of weeks before we finished the inquiry. So supposedly can't be done, can be done, and is being done, right? So, people are getting pushed towards Instagram Teens just for a safer platform. And again, if we create a market in which platforms are safe for kids, we don't need this kind of heavy-handed legislation. As a conservative politician, I hate this kind of stuff. I'd much rather it be an informed conversation between parents and kids. But parents came to us almost uniformly and said, I've lost control. And COVID sped that up, right? All those months of sitting at home, supposedly doing schoolwork on the couch, but actually deleting oneself into YouTube or something way more fun, Netflix, whatever it was. All the good habits, that I had instilled in my household with my stepkids for balanced, moderated internet and screen-based use, it all went out the window.
So I'm just imagining in a world in 8 years' time when there's a sort of new normal being reached in Australia, would you maybe potentially repeal this legislation if it wasn't needed anymore?
If we didn't need it, well, hopefully by then my lot are in power and we can have a good old look at it. And if we don't need it, because all platforms are considered to be safe, or they're just naturally age graded, and the algorithm knows us well enough to know that person's not interested in that stuff. You don't need to give them that extra, slightly more extreme or slightly more daring version of what it is they're interested in. Like, you could make better algorithms. You could make safer algorithms. You could, good old days. Remember 2007 Facebook that was just a chronological feed of your friend's stuff? That's something that's meant to be available in the European context. I know I've tried to get my phone to give me 2007 chronological feed Facebook because I really would like to know what my friends are doing. Instead, I'm getting I
Well,
don't
no, I
know.
remember that brief period with Instagram in the UK where
Yeah.
you'd get to the end of it and it'd say you're fully up to date now, and it was a proper speed bump to stop looking at more stuff.
Yes.
I'm
You
so
are at
glad.
the end of your feed.
Yeah, I'm so glad you listened to our Bridget Phillipson conversation, because it was a very
Yeah.
mind-expanding chat. And actually, Bridget Phillipson is not known for necessarily doing those kind of conversations, so it was a nice treat for me. What did you think about her whole thing about, children are going to have to get used to that very old-fashioned thing of being bored?
I know, don't you love the being bored conversation? Look, we have a beautiful set of, because, we've passed this reform, some of the ads that come up to my, Pollyanna politician feed, because it knows I like these things, is kids talking about, it's meant to be kids from the 90s talking about all the fun things they did. And they said, what do you mean? Like, we'd sit in front of a screen for 8 hours a day. I got a bike to ride, man. And it's just this beautiful, nostalgic reminiscence of our childhoods. But I was thinking, I was listening to a podcast and thinking, what did I do when I was little, when I was bored? I think I just stomped around the house and said to my mother repeatedly, I am bored. And she'd go,
which I'm sure she loved.
Eventually you'll find something to do. And we did, right? But we had much more outdoors lives. I hesitate to say I felt that our lives were safer, but I'm not sure if that's true. Like, if you read the books of Jonathan Haidt, Greg Lukianov, Jean Twenge, we've moved into this kind of safetyist obsession, and we think the kids are safer on the couch with the device in their hand than they may have been on a bike down at the mall or hanging out at the shops or at the park with their friends. And I don't know which is true. I do know that we are all now, as parents, incredibly focused on physical threats to our kids and who they might be running into down the street, but we don't know who they're running into on the iPad either. I sat in the last Parliament on the Parliamentary Joint Committee for Intelligence and National Security. Well, those devices are the number one vector for radicalisation and extremism as well, right? And so in our comments and the inquiry that we did on this social media plan, it wasn't just about mental health. It wasn't just about the way kids are spending their time. It was also that this thing is a vector for radicalisation. I think we had a Minister for Home Affairs say on the weekend, I'm far more worried about what's coming over the browser than what's coming over the border. And without wanting to do his publicity, that's a pretty good explanation of where we're at.
Yeah.
So anyway, my hope is that progressively we all move towards safer social media, safer online lives, safer platforms. And that doesn't mean we ban the dark sides of the internet. It just means we go into these places knowing how to stay on the side that interests us and not getting force-fed something that doesn't interest us.
Zoe, this has been so interesting, and thank you very much for your time. Obviously, the price of entry is that you're now our supporter reporter in Australia. So how is Team Australia doing?
Well, we're pumped, right? So our next game is Saturday morning our time at 5 a.m. against the USA, right? So we're not messing around at this point in time. But it's really good. It's, how to put it, we tend not to be much of not as soccer loving as you guys are. And so when it comes around, it's like, surprise, World Cup. And everyone gets very excited, throw themselves into it. I should have worn my Matilda shirt. I'm an idiot. I forgot to wear the girls soccer team shirt that I have. But, people really throw themselves into it. And so there are lots of parties being organised. We're used to having to get up in the middle of the night to watch something big on the other side of the world. So parties being organised, and it's the middle of winter here, remember, for Saturday morning. And so everyone's pretty excited. So we will see how we go. We never expect to win this thing, but, it doesn't stop us getting
into the spirits.
Yeah, so it'll be good fun on Saturday morning.
Good stuff. Well, enjoy. And Zoe, thank you so much for another mind-expanding conversation. It's been a very brainy week this week. And thank you so much for listening to us for such a long time as well, from such a long way away.
Well, thank you so much for such a beautiful and important and educative podcast that helps me be really smart in my day job.
Oh, we'll put that on the poster for our Edinburgh shows.